human-wildlife conflict, the new Wildlife Action Plan is an inclusive start to a long journey. What are the salient features of new National Wildlife Action Plan? Critically analyze the National Wildlife Action Plan. What are the causes for increasing man-animal conflicts? What should be done to mitigate the man-animal conflict? GS Paper 3, Conservation. What is the context about? In India, wildlife conservation faces complex challenges that vary according to place, time and context. The National Wildlife Action Plans, the first was drafted in 1983, identified some of those challenges and served as long-term roadmaps for addressing them. The new National Wildlife Action Plan, 2017 to 2031, which was released on October 2, reads as a sincere attempt towards meeting the same challenges. The striking difference between the new and the earlier plans is the departure from an exclusionary wildlife conservation model to the incorporation of some inclusive ideas for conservation. What are the salient features of new National Wildlife Action Plan? The key areas of focus of this plan is 17, which includes integration of climate change into wildlife planning, conservation of coastal and marine ecosystem, mitigation of human-wildlife conflict, focus on wildlife health among others. The draft plan places special emphasis on rehabilitation of threatened species along with conserving their habitats like inland aquatic, coastal and marine ecosystems. Ban on certain activities. Mining and big irrigation projects would not be permitted in protected areas and wildlife corridors. The plan asks the Environment Ministry to work with Ministry of Steel to bar mining activities in protected areas and wildlife corridors. Further, it wants proper rehabilitation of degraded and abandoned mining areas. Tourism. While the plan encourages tourism in wildlife areas, it wants restrictions to be placed on the number of tourists and vehicles entering inside a protected area. It provides for the strict monitoring and regulation of the tourism activities. In case of any conflict between tourism and conservation interests of protected areas, the plan categorically favors the conservation interests of protected areas. Law enforcement. The draft calls for setting up of new regional forensic laboratories, a special tiger protection force, special courts to deal with wildlife crimes such as poaching and smuggling. It has observed that the investigation of wildlife crime still lags behind despite the establishment of the National Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, and has called for the capacity building of frontline guards and officers responsible for investigating wildlife crimes. Critically analyze the National Wildlife Action Plan. The action plan under the issue of man-animal conflict has diagnosed the cause of conflict as the loss, degradation and fragmentation of many wildlife habitats, thereby increasing the chances of wild animals moving out of natural habitat. The prescriptions to remedy the situation are vague, such as reduce adverse impacts, create a database, and promote better land use, which is vague without any concrete prescription. The plan states about the use of drones for monitoring of wildlife area, whereas technological challenges such as battery life and range prevent them from widespread use. But no attention is paid to the ethical and social consequences such as violation of right to privacy of the local residents, etc. For the first time, a national policy acknowledges the damage caused by feral dogs and cats around wildlife habitats. But it stated no action plan for that. The action plan does not state any steps for spillover of diseases from wildlife to other animals and human beings. What are the causes for increasing man-animal conflicts? Habitat fragmentation and shrinking of habitat give rise to shrinking of space, food etc. in the forest. This habitat fragmentation may be result of many reasons, for example, construction of roads, especially big highways and canals passing through dense jungles and the big mines. Encroachment in the forest lands by local people has resulted in shrinkage of wildlife habitats. Increased disturbance due to collection of fuel wood, fodder, NTFPs, water etc. from the forests has also increased the incidences of man-animal conflict. Increase in area under cultivation around wildlife habitats and changed cropping pattern have also contributed to increased man-animal conflict. It is observed that the local people have to go deeper and deeper, year by year, for fetching firewood and other forest produce for their bona fide use, because of degradation of forests in the fringes. What should be done to mitigate the man-animal conflict? Control poaching. Poaching of wild animals should be stopped so that the number of wild animals can stabilize at its carrying capacity, which would reach equilibrium in the ecosystem, and this equilibrium between the numbers of prey animals and predators in the forest ecosystem would be maintained. Stop monoculture and increase number of edibles miscellaneous species. Plant monoculture of species like teak should be avoided. Instead, mixed plantations of miscellaneous bamboo and fruit species can be considered. This will provide more food for animals in the forest, hiding shelter to animals as well as provide food for most herbivores. Stop fragmentation of wildlife habitat and wildlife corridors. While going for construction of dams, long canals for irrigation and highways through the forest areas, the fragmentation of wildlife habitat should be avoided and proper care should be taken so that the connectivity through wildlife corridors is not disturbed. Providing LPG to villagers. LPG should be provided to those villagers who frequently go to the forest areas, especially wildlife habitats, to fetch fuel wood for their coolers so that they may stop penetrating into forest and stop inviting man-animal conflicts. Awareness raising. People should be made more and more aware through meetings and pamphlets etc. that they should avoid going deep into the forest areas,